Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. And today I'm going to go my review of WCW's Hog Wild 1996. Starting off the evening, we'll go to our first match of the night. It is for the WCW Cruiserweight Championship. It is Ultimo Dragon versus Rey Mysterio Jr. I thought this was a great match. Back and forth matchup between the Dragon and Mysterio, with the Dragon hitting a spin kick on Mysterio. Dragon then lands multiple kicks on Mysterio. Dragon then hits a handspring back elbow on Mysterio in the corner. Dragon then hits a devastating powerbomb on Mysterio in the middle of the ring. Dragon then applies a figure four leg lock on Mysterio, but Mysterio breaks the hold. Mysterio then gets up, hits a Hurricane Rana off the top rope on the Dragon. The Dragon then gets up, hits a springboard moonsault on Rey Mysterio, but Mysterio ultimately hits his signature Frankensteiner on Ultimo Dragon, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match, and at that time still WCW Cruiserweight Champion, is Rey Mysterio Jr. Hats off to Rey Mysterio Jr. for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Ice Train versus Scott Norton. I thought this was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between Ice Train and Scott Norton, with Norton keeping the pace of the match. Norton and Ice Train both exchange in the middle of the ring, but Norton ultimately applies a submission on Ice Train, and your winner of the match is Scott Norton. Hats off to Scott Norton for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Medusa versus Bull Nakano. I thought this was a good matchup. Nakano was keeping the pace of the match. Medusa then hits a Frankensteiner on Nakano for a near fall. Nakano then gets up, hits a back suplex on Medusa, pins for the 3. Nakano thinks that she won the matchup. Sonny Ono is ringside. He ends up destroying the motorcycle that Medusa came to the ring with. Medusa then destroys Sonny Ono's bike as well. Referee comes out of the ring, raises Medusa's hand, and your winner of the match is Medusa. It looked like after the match, in the match with that back suplex, it looks like Bull Nakano's shoulders were actually pinned to the mat in that German suplex. So Medusa ended up getting the victory in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Dean Malenko versus Chris Benoit. I thought this was a great matchup as well. Back and forth matchup between Malenko and Benoit, with Malenko keeping the pace of the match. Malenko and Benoit both exchange in the middle of the ring, with Benoit hitting a diving headbutt on Malenko. Malenko then gets up, hits a tombstone pile driver on Benoit. Match ends up ending with a time limit draw, but the referee says that there will be an overtime, so the match continues. Malenko then applies a Texas Cloverleaf on Benoit, but the hold is broken. Benoit then ultimately hits a roll-up using the ropes, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Chris Benoit. Hats off to Chris Benoit for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the WCW Tag Team Championships. It is Harlem Heat versus the Steiner Brothers. I thought this was a good match. Back and forth matchup between Harlem Heat and the Steiners, with Harlem Heat keeping the pace of the match. Rick Steiner ultimately hits a devastating power slam in the middle of the ring. Sherry then throws powder into Scott's face. Colonel Parker then hits Scott with a cane. And your winners of the match, due to pinfall, are Harlem Heat. Hats off to Harlem Heat for getting the win in that matchup and retaining the WCW Tag Team Championships. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the WCW United States Championship. It is Eddie Guerrero versus the Nature Boy Ric Flair. I thought this was a great match. Back and forth matchup between Guerrero and Flair, with Flair and Guerrero both exchanging in the middle of the ring. Eddie then lands chops on Flair. Eddie then applies a figure four leg lock on Flair, but Flair quickly breaks the hold. Eddie then hits a head scissors on Flair. Eddie then hits a frog splash on Flair as well, but Flair ultimately applies a figure four leg lock on Eddie Guerrero. And your winner of the match by submission is the Nature Boy, Ric Flair. Hats off to Ric Flair for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is a tag team matchup. It is Nash and Hall versus Lex Luger and Sting. I thought this was a good match. Back and forth matchup between both teams, with Hall and Nash keeping the pace of the match. Lex then goes for a torture rack, but ends up hitting the referee by mistake. Referee then hits Lex Luger in the legs. Hall then goes for the cover, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are Hall and Nash. Hats off to Hall and Nash for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the main event of WCW's Hog Wild 1996. It is the Giant defending the WCW World Heavyweight Championship against Hollywood Hulk Hogan. I thought the match itself was a decent match. Back and forth matchup between the Giant and Hogan, with the Giant keeping the pace of the match. Scott Hall makes his way down to the ring. Giant then hits a chokeslam on Hall. Nash then also makes his way down to the ring, and Giant also hits a chokeslam on Nash. Hogan then hits Giant with the title belt. Hogan then ultimately goes for the cover, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match, and at that time new WCW World Heavyweight Champion, is Hollywood Hogan. Hats off to Hollywood Hogan for getting the win in that match, and at that time becoming the new WCW World Heavyweight Champion. A couple of things I'm going to say about WCW's Hog Wild 1996, man. This was a solid card from top to bottom, in my honest opinion. I'm not going to say it was the best card, but there was a lot of really good matches on this card. Number one, the opening matchup. For the Cruiserweight Championship, Ultimo Dragon versus Rey Mysterio Jr. I've stated this multiple times now about the Cruiserweight division, and I'm going to reiterate it again. The Cruiserweight division was severely underrated for WCW, hands down. I mean, even this match alone, you got two Hall of Famers, Ultimo Dragon and Rey Mysterio Jr., in the ring together, competing for the Cruiserweight Championship. And it just goes to show you how strong this Cruiserweight division was. And, you know, hats off to WCW at that time, man, because WCW, to me, and maybe this is me being biased because I am a WCW fan, but at the end of the day, I feel like WCW had one of the strongest rosters, if not the strongest roster in all professional wrestling. With the names that you know, came in WCW, you know, the legends that came through WCW, the fact that WCW was also working with, you know, New Japan Pro Wrestling and, you know, AAA, and bringing in guys from AAA and New Japan to put on these fantastic shows. And this was something that WWE has yet to do. To be honest with you, yes, they're scouting talent from all over the world, but it's not like WWE really went out of their way to work with another company simultaneously in one night, or bring in another company, or allow, you know, another company bring in their top stars into WCW. And that's what WCW did, or bring, you know, allowing new talent to go to WWE. I don't think WWE really wanted to work with any other company besides themselves. So WCW working with New Japan, I mean, they really did bring in a lot of really good talent, as well as, you know, AAA in Mexico. You know, guys like Conan, Psychosis, Rey Mysterio Jr., you know, Super Calo, you know, guys like that, that really, you know, came over from AAA, that really made a decent name for themselves over in Mexico. So you got to give credit where credit's due, man. WCW's Cruiserweight division was severely underrated. Medusa versus Bull Nakano. Again, it was a really good match, man. It was a rivalry matchup between Medusa and Bull Nakano. Bull Nakano was a big time superstar over in Japan. Huge superstar, legend. And Medusa's kind of the same thing in the States, man. She's an absolute legend. And this was a great match, man. It really was. It was a solid matchup, with Medusa coming out victorious in that match. Dean Malenko versus Chris Benoit, man. Again, a really good matchup. I think both styles gel perfectly in the ring together. You got both technical wrestlers in the ring, being Malenko and Chris Benoit. And like I stated before, man, despite what Benoit's done in his personal life, I still stand behind what I said with as far as in-ring ability and in-ring talent. The guy can wrestle. You know, I don't agree with what he did in his personal life. I know Benoit was probably going through a lot of problems at that time in his life. That doesn't mean I agree with it. But as far as, I'm talking as far as in-ring ability, in-ring talent, athleticism, I mean, Benoit had the complete total package of what a professional wrestler should be personified. In my honest opinion. I mean, maybe his promos weren't the best, but as far as an actual wrestler is concerned, I mean, yeah, you know, there's not many guys in the wrestling world that can really hold a candle to what wrestling ability that Benoit brought to the table, in my honest opinion. So to have these two guys match up, Malenko and Benoit, and just, I mean, have a great match. I mean, I think it was almost a 30-minute matchup between Malenko and Benoit, and it went to a time limit draw. And it was a great match. It really was. I mean, you had Woman and you had Miss Elizabeth ringside for Benoit. And the crowd was into it, man. And like I said about Malenko, I'm a big fan of Dean Malenko, by the way. And he's severely underrated, man, especially in that cruiserweight division and what he brought to the table as a cruiserweight. I mean, what better cruiserweight can you ask for? Number one. Number two, Malenko versus Benoit, in my honest opinion, could have main evented any pay-per-view in the world and probably sold out. In my honest opinion, man. It was a great match. And, again, hats off to Benoit for getting the win in that match. Harlem Heat versus the Steiners. Again, big fan of the Steiner brothers. But, again, it was something where I will say this. As far as WCW's roster is concerned, I feel like their tag team division was kind of weak. In my honest opinion, I love the Steiner brothers, man. The Steiner brothers are great. Rick and Scott Steiner, Harlem Heat. Awesome tag teams. But then you also had the Faces of Fear with Ming and Barbarian. And after those three teams, really who's next in, the tag team division? The Nasty Boys, Brian Knobbs, and Jerry Sags. Their tag team division was really weak, in my honest opinion. That was one of the weakest things about WCW was their tag team division. And they didn't really have a women's division either. I mean, they really didn't. It wasn't like, Medusa was on TV wrestling every night. They really didn't invest in a women's roster or a women's division in WCW. So that could have been one of the things that really hindered WCW at that time, in my honest opinion, was not having a strong tag team division as well as a women's division on WCW television. Eddie Guerrero versus Ric Flair, again, great matchup. Eddie Guerrero, an absolute legend in professional wrestling. Rest in peace to Eddie Guerrero. This was a great match, man. I mean, for what it's worth, I think Eddie Guerrero, the way that they were hyping him up on commentary at that time, there was Tony Schiavone and Dusty Rhodes and Bobby the Brain Heenan on commentary throughout the night for this card. And nothing but praise for Eddie Guerrero, man. I mean, they really did enjoy his talent and what he brought to the table and what he brought in that ring. Like I said, it's the same thing that happens with Benoit and Malenko. The athleticism that these guys brought to the table is uncanny, man. Nobody can really match what Guerrero brought to the table. And he's still being celebrated to this day, and rightfully so, man. I mean, Eddie Guerrero, there will never be another Eddie Guerrero. Ever. Whether people loved him or hated him, man. I mean, Eddie Guerrero is an absolute legend in professional wrestling. I think Eddie Guerrero now, looking at what's going on in the landscape of professional wrestling, I mean, who knows what Eddie would have done? Would he would have stayed with WWE or gone to AEW? I don't know. I mean, we see Vicky Guerrero on AEW television, so who knows, man? I mean, it's just crazy to see, what his life would have, where he would have been out now if he was still alive, and what, would he be training people at the NXT Performance Center, or would he still be wrestling in the ring in NXT or AEW? I mean, it's insane, man. I mean, Eddie Guerrero was an absolute legend, and this match between him and Flair, man, was a fantastic matchup. And Eddie Guerrero, in my honest opinion, as far as his WCW run, I mean, despite, I guess, his size and stature, I mean, he's not like a big time wrestler as far as weight and stature is concerned, but the guy can wrestle. And to me, honestly, he should have been multi-time world champion. I know he had a couple of opportunities with the Cruiserweight Championship, but, Eddie could have been multi-time United States champion, if not world heavyweight champion. I just don't think WCW really wanted to build their roster around a guy like Eddie Guerrero, which is a shame because the guy can wrestle. And he's an absolute legend. But unfortunately, in this matchup, Flair ended up becoming victorious and retaining the WCW United States Championship. But all in all, it was a decent match. Nash Hall versus Lex and Sting. Again, solid matchup. I mean, I think this was the first match, pay-per-view match that Scott Hall and Kevin Nash had as a team, as the outsiders. It was a decent match, man. It really was. And to be honest with you, it was one of those things where, like I said in the last review, when Hogan was the third man and he joined NWO, or they created NWO, it shocked the wrestling world, man. It was a historic night that will live in, the history books of pro wrestling forever. The fact that Hogan turned heel and joined the likes of Hall and Nash. Absolutely insane. And the main event, Giant versus Hollywood Hogan. Again, just like I said about Nash and Hall, this was the first pay-per-view, I believe, event that, Hulk Hogan came out as the NWO Hollywood Hogan. And a lot of fans were 50-50 on Hogan's heel turn. I think it was great for Hogan, to be honest with you. I think a lot of people, even at that time, around 95, 96, were getting tired of the same old Hulk Hogan, saying your prayers, eating your vitamins, the red and yellow Hulk Hogan. And I think a lot of people got tired of it. And they wanted to see a change. And I mean, that change still happens till this day in wrestling. You look at Roman Reigns and how he was a babyface and then turned heel. And honestly, some of the best work he's done in his career is being a heel rather than a babyface as far as Roman Reigns is concerned. You have MJF from AEW, who's probably one of the biggest heels in the business right now. And a lot of fans are gravitated towards him, whether you love him or you hate him. And a lot of fans hate him. But he knows what he's doing, and he's one of the best heels, if not the best heel in the business right now, in my honest opinion. And I think Hogan, at this time, I mean, he needed a change. You know, you're going into the mid 90s, going into, you know, early 2000s, something needed to change. It's kind of the same thing with Sting. You know, Sting took some time off. You know, everybody was getting tired of seeing the, you know, the blonde hair Sting and wanted to see something more different with Sting. And then when Sting came back at Starrcade to challenge Hollywood Hogan, you know, after all those vignettes that were played and him sitting in the rafters and everything else like that, and, you know, he faced Hogan at Starrcade looking like the Crow. And that's what we know Sting of as of now. A lot of people don't even remember Sting not as the Crow, you know. Early days of Sting, he was not the Crow character, man. He was a blonde hair guy with face paint from Venice Beach, California. You know? And then when he would turn into the Crow Sting, I mean, a lot of people growing up in, you know, in wrestling and being a fan know Sting as the Crow Sting. Now, do I think it's a better character than the original Sting? Yes, I do. I think the Sting that we got, you know, from the time he faced Hogan at Starrcade and up till this point, I mean, the guy's still wrestling in AEW, and he's like, what, 60 years old? Something like that. I mean, it's absolutely insane the amount of, you know, what he's done in his career, and he's still wrestling till this day. It's absolutely insane, man. But, like I said about Hog Wild, man, Hog Wild 1996 was a solid card. Like I said, not the best card, but absolutely not the worst. And just like I do with every single one of these pay-per-views, you guys know by now, I always give these pay-per-views a rating from 1 out of 10. Honestly, man, I'm going to give this one a solid 7. This was a really good card. Like I said, not the worst, not the best, but definitely not the worst. But, yeah, I'm going to have to give WCW Hog Wild 1996 a solid 7 at best. But this is my review of WCW's Hog Wild 1996. I hope you guys are out there staying safe. Be careful, and remember, stay classic. Peace.